The wind howled through the mountain pass like a wounded animal, carrying with it the first bitter taste of winter. Snow fell in lazy spirals, dusting the rocky trail that wound its way through the Wyoming Territory wilderness. The stagecoach lurched and groaned as it navigated the treacherous path, its wheels struggling for purchase on the frost-slicked stones. Inside the coach, Evelyn Parker pressed her gloved hands together, trying to ward off the cold that seeped through every crack and crevice. Her traveling dress, once pristine navy wool, was now dusty and wrinkled from 3 days of hard travel. She gazed out the small window at the forbidding landscape, towering pines shrouded in mist, jagged rocks jutting from the earth like broken teeth, and endless miles of untamed wilderness that seemed to swallow all traces of civilization. At 23, Evelyn had the delicate features of Eastern refinement, honey-colored hair pinned beneath a modest bonnet, green eyes that held more sorrow than a woman her age should carry, and hands that knew needlework better than hard labor. Yet here she was, bound for a future as uncertain as the mountain weather. The driver, a grizzled man named Josiah, shouted something unintelligible over the wind. The coach swayed dangerously, and Evelyn gripped the worn leather seat. She thought of the letter tucked in her reticule, the one from Mr. Samuel Travis, the rancher who had paid her passage west. A man she had never met, but would soon call husband. "Miss Parker, you come highly recommended as a woman of good character and domestic skills. I'm a man of means, but little time for courtship. If you are willing to make a life in the territory, I offer you security and respectability as my wife. Security and respectability, not love, not companionship. Just another transaction, like the one that had bound her to servitude after her parents' deaths. But what choice did she have? The factory work in Boston barely kept her fed, and her late husband's deaths had left her with nothing but shame. The coach hit a deep rut, jolting violently. Evelyn heard Josiah curse as the horses whinnied in distress. Through the window she could see they had entered a narrow canyon, the walls closing in like a trap. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes that obscured the trail ahead. "Hold tight, miss," Josiah's voice carried back on the wind. "Weather's turning mean." The words had barely reached her when she felt the coach tilt at an impossible angle. Time seemed to slow as the world turned sideways. Evelyn's scream was lost in the cacophony of splintering wood, terrified horses, and Josiah's final shout. The coach rolled once, twice, before coming to rest against a massive boulder. Then, darkness. When consciousness returned, it came with pain, sharp and insistent in her ribs and shoulder. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open to find herself half buried in snow. The overturned coach was a dark shape against the white landscape. The horses were gone. Their harnesses snapped. Of Josiah, she saw only a still form pinned beneath the wreckage. "Josiah!" Her voice was barely a whisper. She crawled toward him, ignoring the fire in her ribs. But one look at his glassy eyes and the unnatural angle of his neck told her all she needed to know. Alone. She was alone in the wilderness, with night falling and a storm building. Her traveling case had burst open, scattering her few possessions across the snow. She gathered what she could with trembling hands, a woolen shawl, her mother's Bible, and the letter from Samuel Travis, now smeared with moisture. The cold was already seeping through her clothes, turning her fingers numb. She knew she had to find shelter or perish. But which direction? The trail had vanished beneath fresh snow, and the canyon walls offered no clue. Evelyn struggled to her feet, wrapping the shawl tight around her shoulders. Each step sent pain shooting through her side, but she pressed on, following what she hoped was the trail. The wind picked up, driving snow into her face until she could barely see. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time lost meaning in the white void. Her strength was failing when she stumbled, falling hard into a drift. This time, she couldn't rise. The cold didn't hurt anymore. It was almost warm, inviting her to rest. So this is how it ends, she thought dimly, not as a bride, but as another casualty of the frontier. Through the veil of falling snow, a shape materialized, massive and dark against the white. At first, she thought it was a bear, and a weak laugh escaped her blue lips. Eaten by a bear, how fitting an end. But the shape moved with human purpose, and as it drew closer, she saw it was a man. No, more than a man. A giant wrapped in furs and leather, with a rifle slung across his broad back. His face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat and the shadow of a full beard. But his movements were sure, despite the treacherous ground. He stopped when he saw her, standing still as a statue for a long moment. Then he was moving again, closing the distance with long strides. Evelyn tried to speak, to plead for help, but no words came. The mountain man knelt beside her, and she caught a glimpse of eyes the color of a winter sky, pale blue and unreadable. Without a word, he shed his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, the warmth of it almost painful against her frozen skin. Then, as easily as if she weighed nothing, he lifted her into his arms. "Please," she managed through chattering teeth. "The coach. Josiah." "Saw it," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "He's beyond help." "You're not yet." The journey that followed was a blur of white and cold, and the steady rhythm of his breathing. Evelyn drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of strong arms holding her secure and the gradual return of blessed warmth. When she next opened her eyes fully, she was lying on a bed of furs before a crackling fire. The space was small but well built. A cabin of fitted logs, tools, and supplies hung neatly on the walls. The scent of wood smoke and pine filled her nostrils. The mountain man sat on a stool near the fire, working on something with a knife. Now she could see him clearly. Weathered features that spoke of years in the elements. Dark hair that hung past his collar, hands scarred from hard use. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 35, but the wilderness had marked him. "You're awake." He didn't look up from his work. "Good. Wasn't sure you'd make it." "Where am I?" she whispered. "My place." "About 5 miles from where your coach went over." 5 miles? Evelyn struggled to sit up, gasping at the pain in her ribs. "But I need to, Mr. Travis is expecting me in Cedar Ridge." Now he did look at her, those pale eyes studying her with an intensity that made her pull the blanket higher. Storm's not breaking for days. Even then, the trail's blocked by the wreck. "You're not going anywhere." The reality of her situation crashed over her, alone in a cabin with a stranger, a mountain man who lived apart from civilization. Her reputation, already fragile, would be in ruins. "I can't stay here," she said, though even she heard the futility in her voice. "You can't leave either." He returned to his carving. "Unless you fancy freezing to death. But it's not proper." That earned her a sound that might have been a laugh. "Propriety doesn't count for much out here, miss. Survival does." He rose, moving to a shelf where various supplies were stored. She noticed he walked with a slight favor to his left leg. An old injury, perhaps. He returned with a tin cup filled with something that steamed. "Tea," he said, holding it out. "Pine needle and willow bark. It'll help with the pain." Evelyn accepted it gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm metal. "Thank you, mister?" "Colt. Colt Harwood." "Evelyn Parker," she said softly. He nodded once. "Get some rest, Miss Parker. You'll need it." Outside, the wind screamed through the canyon, but in that small cabin, Evelyn felt, for the first time since leaving Boston, safe. The next morning, pale light filtered through the small cabin window, painting the rough-hewn logs in soft gold. Evelyn stirred beneath the heavy furs, her ribs aching with every breath. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then, the scent of smoke and pine, the crackle of the fire, and the low hum of a man's voice brought it all back. Colt Harwood was at the table, mending a leather strap. His movements were efficient, almost quiet enough to be mistaken for stillness. Evelyn watched him for a moment, taking in the raw strength in his shoulders, the patience in his hands. He looked like the wilderness itself, harsh, steady, and untamed. "You should eat," he said without looking up. "Stew's on the stove." Startled that he'd noticed her watching, Evelyn pushed herself up, wincing at the sharp pain in her side. Colt was at her side in 2 strides. "Easy." "I can manage," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. He handed her a bowl, steam curling from its surface. "Rabbit and roots." Not much, but it'll do. Evelyn tasted it cautiously. It was plain, but warm, and warmth was worth more than gold in these mountains. She studied him between bites. His face bore the marks of a life lived far from comfort, lines etched by wind and solitude. But there was intelligence there too, and a strange gentleness that didn't fit the stories she'd heard of mountain men. "How long have you lived up here?" she asked. "Long enough." "Don't you get lonely?" Colt gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Loneliness ain't the worst thing that can happen to a man." Evelyn didn't press. She sensed he was a man who shared only what he chose. Still, something in his tone made her heart ache. By the third day, she was well enough to move around the cabin. Her ribs still throbbed, but idleness grated on her nerves. "I can help," she said, watching him sharpen his knife by the fire. "You need to heal. I need to be useful." He glanced up, studying her, then nodded toward the kettle. "You can watch the stew while I check the trap lines." It was a small concession, but she took it as a victory. As he pulled on his coat, she noticed a deep scar on his forearm, long and jagged, like an old wound that had nearly cost him his life. "Be careful," she said before she could stop herself. He looked at her for a long moment, unreadable, then simply said, "Always am." When he returned that evening, snow clung to his coat and beard. He dropped 2 rabbits on the table and began skinning them with practiced ease. "Storm's easing," he said quietly. "Might clear in a day or 2. Evelyn froze, her heart lifting and sinking at once. "Then I can leave?" Colt's knife paused mid-cut. "If you think you can make it to Cedar Ridge in this weather, sure." "I have to," she insisted, though the thought of leaving that small, warm cabin filled her with unexpected dread. "Travis'll still be there," Colt said flatly. "He's not going anywhere." She looked up sharply. "You know him?" "Know of him," Colt said. "Owns half of Cedar Ridge. Keeps the other half owing him money." Evelyn's stomach turned. He seemed respectable in his letters. He gave a humorless chuckle. "That's how men like him keep their power, respectable on paper, rotten underneath." The conversation left her unsettled. She retreated to her corner, staring into the fire long after Colt had gone to bed. Her life, her very survival, was now tied to a man she'd never met, while the man who had saved her life slept a few feet away, as unreachable as the moon. Days passed. The storm finally broke, leaving a glittering blanket of white across the valley. Evelyn stepped outside for the first time, the cold air biting her cheeks. The world was breathtakingly still, a silence so complete it almost frightened her. Colt followed, standing beside her as the sun rose over the ridge. "You ever seen snow like this?" he asked. "Not in Boston," she admitted, smiling faintly. "It's beautiful." "Beautiful can kill you if you don't respect it," he said. "Same as most things worth looking at." His words lingered long after they returned inside. That evening, as Colt repaired a broken trap, a thunderous crack shook the cabin. Evelyn jumped, heart pounding. What was that? "Tree branch," Colt said, already pulling on his coat. "Roof took a hit. Stay put." "You can't go out there. It's dark." Quote, "Roof won't wait till morning." He was already halfway to the door. Evelyn hesitated, then grabbed her shawl and followed. The wind cut through her dress like knives, but she couldn't bear the thought of him out there alone. She spotted him on the roof, axe in hand, clearing the fallen branch. "Colt, come down!" she shouted. "You'll fall!" "Almost done," he called back, but the next gust of wind knocked him off balance. Without thinking, Evelyn ran to the ladder, steadying it as he scrambled down. When his boots hit the ground, she grabbed his arm, trembling with anger and fear. "You fool! You could have died!" He looked down at her, snow caught in his beard, those pale eyes unreadable. "You came out," he said softly. "Of course I did." She realized how close they stood, her hand still gripping his sleeve. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The air between them seemed to hum. Then Colt gently took her hand, pried it loose, and led her back inside. "You'll catch your death out there," he said, hanging his coat by the fire. "So will you if you keep tempting fate." He almost smiled. "Fair point," Quote, They stood in silence for a moment, steam rising from their wet clothes. Then Evelyn noticed a dark stain spreading across his sleeve. You're bleeding. He glanced down. Branch caught me, it's nothing. It's not nothing. Sit. Her tone left no room for argument. She found his supplies and cleaned the cut, her hand steady though her heart raced. Up close, she could smell pine and smoke on his skin. He winced once, then said quietly, You have a gentle touch. My mother was a nurse before she married, she murmured. She taught me a little. Useful skill. When she finished, she tied the bandage and sat back. Try not to open it again with your heroics. He caught her hand before she could pull away. Thank you. 2 simple words, but the way he said them, low and sincere, made her pulse quicken. That night, she couldn't sleep. The storm had passed, leaving a deep quiet. In the dim firelight, she watched Colt asleep on his bedroll by the door. The hard lines of his face were softened by sleep. For the first time, she wondered not what kind of man he was, but what kind of loneliness had driven him so deep into these mountains. As she drifted into uneasy dreams, one thought lingered. She had come west to marry a stranger for security, but the man who had saved her life was the first to ever make her feel safe. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The days after the storm passed in a rhythm that almost felt like peace. Evelyn's ribs mended slowly under Colt's care, and her strength returned. She learned to start the fire the way he did, using bark and flint instead of matches. She mended his shirts, cooked meals with what little they had, and found that her hands, so used to delicate things, had learned to be strong. When Colt wasn't hunting or checking traps, he taught her small things about the land. See those clouds? He'd say, pointing toward the horizon. Flat on the bottom, heavy on top. Snow by morning. Quote, He never said much, but she began to understand him in the spaces between words. There was kindness in the way he made sure her water stayed warm, quiet care in how he turned away when she changed clothes, and an honesty in every action that made her trust him more each day. Still, she knew her time there couldn't last forever. Every letter of Mr. Travis's still echoed in her mind, every promise of security and respectability. But when she imagined that life now, her heart sank like a stone. One afternoon, Colt came in from the cold, his beard frosted white. Found tracks near the ridge, he said. Boot prints, not mine. Evelyn froze. Someone's out there? He nodded. Riders, 3, maybe 4, looked fresh. Could they be from Cedar Ridge? Searching for me? Could be. He studied her closely. Would they have reason to? Evelyn hesitated. Mr. Travis paid for my passage. He might come looking. Colt's jaw tightened. What kind of man sends men into the mountains after a woman in this weather? Quote, The kind who thinks he owns what he's paid for, she said softly. The next morning, Colt saddled his horse. I'll find out who's sniffing around. You stay inside, bar the door, and don't open it for anyone but me. Be careful, she whispered. He gave a short nod. Always am. Evelyn watched him disappear into the trees, her heart pounding. Hours crawled by, the silence pressing on her ears. When a knock finally came, her heart leapt. Colt? No answer. Then a voice, soft and uncertain. Miss Parker, are you inside? I was sent from Cedar Ridge. Mr. Travis is worried sick about you. She froze, pulse hammering. How do you know my name? Everyone in town knows. The mail-order bride who never arrived. Evelyn gripped the pistol Colt had left her. You should go back the way you came. The man's voice grew harder. He paid me good money to bring you home. Don't make this difficult. Before she could answer, a gunshot split the air. The stranger's cry echoed through the canyon. Then silence. Evelyn ran to the window just in time to see Colt step from the trees, rifle still smoking. Stay inside, he called. By the time he came back in, snow clung to his coat and blood streaked his cheek. He'll live, he said quietly. But Travis knows where you are now. Evelyn's stomach turned cold. Then he'll come. Colt nodded once. Then we'll be ready. That night, the fire burned low as they sat in silence. Finally, Evelyn said, "Why do you live out here alone, Colt?" He stared into the flames. "Because I wasn't fit for anywhere else." She waited. "I was a soldier once, then a hired gun. Did what men paid me to do, sometimes to people who didn't deserve it. Got good at killing. Too good." His voice was flat, but she heard the weight in it. "I tried to walk away, but the past don't take kindly to being left behind." She moved closer. "You're not that man anymore." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "You don't know that. I know the man who carried me through a blizzard, who hasn't let me go hungry or cold. That's the man I see." For a long time, neither spoke. The fire cracked softly, throwing gold light across the room. Then Colt said, "You should go when the weather clears. Back to Cedar Ridge, back to your life." "My life?" she said bitterly. "A transaction with a man I don't love? A cage dressed up as safety?" "Better a cage than a grave," he said quietly. Evelyn stood, her voice trembling. "No, better to live free, even if it kills you." Colt's eyes lifted to hers. Blue, bright, burning. He rose slowly, closing the distance between them. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You're trying to save me from you, but I don't need saving. Not from you." For a moment he didn't move. Then he reached out, his calloused fingers brushing her cheek. "You should be with someone who can give you more than a cabin and a wanted man's shadow." "Maybe I don't want more," she breathed. "Maybe I just want you." The space between them vanished. His mouth found hers, rough, hesitant at first, then fierce. The world fell away. The snow, the danger, the distance. There was only warmth, only life, only the beat of two hearts that had been frozen for far too long. When they finally parted, Colt rested his forehead against hers, breath unsteady. "Evelyn, this can't." "It already has," she whispered. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, the walls he'd built around himself began to crumble. That night, they didn't speak of tomorrow. They simply held each other before the fire until the last embers dimmed. At dawn, Colt packed supplies. "We'll leave today," he said. "Head north. Find a place the world forgot." Evelyn nodded. "Wherever you go, I go." They stepped into the cold morning together, leaving behind the cabin that had become both prison and sanctuary. Ahead lay the unknown, the wild, the dangerous, the free. And for the first time, Evelyn Parker wasn't afraid. Because she wasn't running anymore. She was choosing him, choosing love, choosing forever in the arms of a mountain man who had saved her life and claimed her heart.